Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Cardozi.
Looking forward to seeing folks. The room is filling up. So happy to see all these wonderful names.
Yes, me too.
Thanks everybody for joining. We'll give it another few seconds for folks to come on in. All right. Do you want to get started?
Let's do it.
All right.
I'm like the
Hello,
president.
folks. My name is Cardozi Jones. I'm CEO and founder of True North EDI.
Hey, everyone. I'm Erin Dunleavy, Vice President at True North EDI. Excited to be with you all today.
Very excited. True North EDI is if you don't know who we are a consulting firm. We work with nonprofits, foundations, corporations in the DEI sector, but from a place of our value system is around organizational health. So we believe DEI is inextricably linked to health. And a lot of our work is about finding ways to intervene, finding ways to transform, finding ways to become healthier, more balanced, more just organizations. And we will keep moving forward. I'll say the name. This is Transforming Conflict, a values-based approach for managers and leaders. So I will go through the agenda for the day. This is a 75-minute webinar. So first, we're going to explore what we've inherited around conflict, both personally and collectively. The starting point for a large part of our work is inheritances. What have we learned, absorbed from communities, from parents, from the world, and how do we apply that to our lives? We're going to walk through a case study of a common workplace conflict. It may feel, common depending on who you are, but it isn't kind of like a big blow up per se, kind of a thing that can happen very easily throughout the day. Um, we're going to explore a values-based approach to transforming that conflict using a restorative model for sharing and receiving. So we'll go through two models today, one for kind of sharing conflict or sharing an incident of harm, and one for receiving it. And then we'll close out, hopefully with a nice chunk of time for a Q&A. We'll be using the chat function throughout the webinar for reflection. We'll do that in just a moment, actually. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll use the Q&A function to kind of get questions from the group. And then closed captions are available. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be an option to turn on closed captions.
All right. So utilizing the chat function, we want to ask, in a professional community, what can get in the way of healthy conflict? So what might get in the way of healthy, meaningful conflict that we're moving through in a way where both people feel whole at the end of it? Looks like the chat function is disabled, is what this is saying. Oh, there we go. Great. Fear, ego. Thank you, Robin. Absolutely. What else gets in the way of healthy conflict? That's great. Juliana, thank you so much. Power dynamics. We are going to talk about that today. Absolutely. So it's looking like it's disabled for some folks.
So we can
Uh,
we can use the Q&A. That's fine. This is
yeah,
working out.
absolutely. Utilize the Q&A. Urgency, something that Lisa said. That's great. Great. Bias. Thank you so much. Psychological safety. That's a big one. Different perspectives. Defensiveness. Politeness. We really love to dig into politeness protocols in organizational spaces. Conflict avoidance, absolutely. Personalities, intolerance, we're seeing hierarchy. Absolutely, fear of losing your job, right? That ties deeply into power dynamics. Thank you so much, everyone. Sorry about the chat. We are going to use the Q&A function, should be available to you, and it appears to us just like the chat. So these are some of the main, I would say, obstacles to healthy conflict in the workplace.
So just to give some context for what we were thinking when we decided to host this webinar, one thing is, we're talking about a values-based approach to conflict transformation, a restorative approach. So when we say values, what are we saying values as opposed to? And I think at a basic level, we're saying coming from a place of values and declared values versus coming from a place of just reaction, right? So many of us enter conflict reacting to our emotions, reacting to kind of outside forces. What we're offering here is, what does it look like to design and come from and practice a place of values and then move through those values through the conflict.
Absolutely. What we inherit as leaders matters so much. So many eons ago, Cardozi and I come from the world of education, and there's a famous saying that you tend to teach how you were taught. This is true about a lot of things. You tend to manage conflict how you were taught to manage conflict. And in the workplace, if you inherited a value that the boss is always right, don't rock the boat, right? You might, even in a leadership position, reproduce those values. So we want to look at what we inherit as leaders.
Yeah, thank you. Additionally, we want to recognize that our relationship to conflict can be pervasive. It can pervade our teams, depending on our role, it can pervade our organizations. And ultimately, what we are often doing is teaching people how to be careful around us, how to engage us using our approach to conflict, rather than, again, a values approach, rather than any kind of agreements we come together to discuss as relates to conflict. So we want to recognize that that relationship has an impact far beyond us as leaders, even two people, right? It can go far.
Thanks so much. I love this bullet. This is my favorite one. I think beyond a tool, the challenge of conflict is the challenge of what we call knowing thyself. We do a lot of work at True North EDI on biases, and there's kind of a whole suite of biases that are often considered the delusion biases, meaning I can't necessarily see myself. I tend to think I'm one way, but I behave another one. So I actually have to be really honest with myself about how I show up in conflict. Sometimes that's not pretty to look at. I'm speaking from experience here, but I want to know what really kind of sets me off, what prevents me from being my best self in conflict. So that's the challenge of knowing thyself, is really where we want to start in any kind of conflict model.
Thank you. And so for the case of this webinar and this conversation, we want to offer that the onus and the added responsibility of engaging conflict in a healthy, transformative way, in a restorative way, is on the leader, on the person who is positionally powered up. Now, all things aren't equal here, right? Identity is complex. There's intersectionality present in every body that's in a space. But we want to experiment with the idea that, what if it was my responsibility to engage this conflict? What would that look like? What would that mean for my team, for my organization, for my practice?
And finally, that leads us right into accessing the possibilities that exist on the other side of conflict. We want to consider every conflict as an opportunity to deepen a relationship, to improve a relationship, to know one another better. And so there is a lot of possibility on the other side of conflict if we can expand what it is that we're trying to get out of our conflict. Am I looking to win, or am I looking to learn? So those are some of the things we're going to invite ourselves to think about today. One way that we can do this is called the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. So ultimately, it works like a matrix. You might see on the left-hand side, we have low to high assertiveness, and the bottom, we have low to high cooperativeness. You can also sometimes hear that rephrased as kind of care for self and care for others, is sometimes how it's talked about. So we all have default responses to conflict in different contexts. So that's really important. We might show up very differently in conflict at work than we do in conflict with our loved ones at home. So in a professional context, in a professional setting, take a moment to think about what's your default response. When Cardozi said, when we're reacting rather than responding thoughtfully, taking the time to do that, do you tend to have extremely high assertiveness with low cooperativeness? That would be a competitive approach to conflict. Or are you accommodating, right? A very, very high care and concern for others and cooperativeness with a low amount of assertiveness. None of these are considered better than the others. They're just informational. There are times when conflict avoidance is the best option, right? There are certain situations where that is truth. So we'll just take a moment to look at this here.
And I
Cardozi,
think
where
also, Aaron, yeah, thank you. One thing that, we always talk about is really looking at this word default, right? Defaults are things that can operate outside of our awareness, in our subconscious, things we don't know that we're operating through. So in addition to these not being good or bad or better or worse than the others, what is problematic or creates more challenges is when we're operating in ways that we don't recognize are present.
right, absolutely. Okay.
So as we shared, we're going to look at a case study that describes an experience of a workplace conflict. So after that, we'll unpack a sample dialogue in which the experience is being shared. And we'll talk more about the idea of sharing and receiving in a moment. But first, we will move through the case study and assign our roles. So I'll give you the next slide, Aaron. So we have two characters. We have Alex, who is a VP of Communications, and we have Jalen, Communications Director. The setting is a nonprofit whose mission is to match committed volunteer professionals with community-based projects in need of various skills and support. I will be playing the role of Alex today, and Aaron, if you would, please play the role of Jalen.
Got it. All right, going back to our theater roots, Cardozi.
All right. Can I see your whole screen here? Yes, I do. Move my chat out of the way. All right. Jalen, I wanted to talk to you about the draft of the newsletter before we send it out tomorrow. I have some concerns.
Okay, what's up?
I thought we already discussed this last month, but the tone still feels too informal for who we are as an organization.
Okay, I sent this to you for review last week, so this feels a little last minute. But you should know that I'm intentionally crafting the tone to be more conversational and more relatable. I tried to incorporate some of your feedback while still communicating that who we are as an organization is not uptight and out of touch.
I appreciate the intention, but we can't send this out. A lot of our stakeholders expect a certain level of formality in our communications. This is why we have a brand guide.
Alex, if you're talking about the board or donors, most of them don't represent the younger generation of volunteers the organization is trying to recruit. And the brand guide is completely out of date. You brought me on because I'm tapped into the voice of that population.
But I didn't bring you on to alienate important people who help us keep the lights on, Jalen.
Okay, now you're just overreacting. My team worked really hard to find a tone that felt accessible and authentic. And when you hired me, you told me I'd have the freedom to explore and experiment with different methods of communication.
Yes, Jalen, but you being inflexible doesn't work. Regardless, this has got to go out tomorrow, and I can't approve it until it's revised.
I think the fact that I will now have to stay after work hours to rewrite copy that you've had in your inbox for a week shows just how flexible I am.
And scene.
Scene? All right. So we're going to return to this matrix. looking back at this matrix now, consider what you saw show up in the case study. And Cardozy and I are going to talk a little bit through even just like trying on the language of those characters, where we felt like there was high to low assertiveness and cooperativeness. I also want to say that in this conflict mode, we're not quite looking at power here. We are going to, and it's really important, but we like to say this is a little bit incomplete as a way to think about conflict, but it is a good entry point. So I think, for example, Jalen was showing some pretty strong assertiveness, which felt called for in the moment.
Yeah, I also think by the end of it, there was some accommodation.
Yeah.
I also saw toward the end there some avoidance from Alex at the point when they just no longer wanted to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
So I also think that as we read through that case study, as you listen to us speak through it, I want us to consider some questions for ourselves, more like a self-diagnostic, right? So as we're experiencing the case study, are you thinking that someone is right or wrong? Is that your go-to feeling here? Oh, clearly there's a wrong person and a right person. Do you feel someone deserves punishment or consequences? Is there clear for you that someone actually it should be consequenced here? Are you wondering about missing contexts, that might justify someone's words of behavior? What did Jalen do last month? How has Alex been? How are we looking for more information or justification? And is there a power structure you feel should be respected here? Is there an issue of respect that feels very visceral to you that comes up, very easily for you? I ask these questions because in the moment of conflict, a lot's happening in our bodies, a lot's happening in our emotions. As leaders, again, depending on what we've inherited, what we've experienced, as people with a multitude of identities, a lot's happening in these moments. And I think it's worth stopping to say, how are we reading? How are we experiencing what's happening? And there's no right or wrong answer here, right? But it does go back to the matrix and thinking about those defaults, those orientations.
Absolutely. There's a way that I want to show up in a moment of conflict, and then there's things happening in my body, in my shoulders, in my heart, in my chest that I might not necessarily be able to control. So, sorry, go ahead, Cardizi.
So as we said, we're going to move through, share with you two kind of models for moving through conflict. And these models are about how to share when conflict has happened or share when harm has happened and how to receive that. Now, given the context of this webinar, we are looking at the manager/leader's responsibility. Now, that said, Jalen has a team. Jalen's also a manager. And for the majority of us who are managers and leaders, we have people that we supervise and people that supervise us. That's a common relationship. So we do want to share with you a possible way forward for Jalen to share their feelings about what's happened. And hopefully this is a useful tool for you as well. I think we have, what's the next slide, Erin, actually?
Well, we're going to model it.
Got it. Okay, great.
And so while we're modeling this, this model for response, we'd like you to reflect on what are the qualities of the response and what you see happening. So a way that Jalen might approach this is to start with what happened, and folks familiar with restorative practices are going to be very familiar with that question. Jalen might say, so the day before the newsletter was supposed to go out, you shared your concerns with me about the tone being too informal. I shared the draft with you a week prior for feedback, but hadn't heard anything from you until that moment. That led me having to work late to revise the letter until it was in a place where you felt comfortable signing off on. You also said that I was being inflexible. So I take a lot of pride in my team's work, and I didn't feel that the time and effort we put into drafting the newsletter was acknowledged or respected. and I felt really unseen for my expertise as a communications expert. And I felt taken advantage of with the expectation that I should have to stay late working on something that I think was due in a large part to me not getting timely feedback. So I'm open to feedback, and I want to get on the same page about the expectations for the newsletter. I also would like to share more formally some thoughts I have about what we can change in terms of the voice of the organization. But before any of that, I'd like to create some values and agreements between the two of us about communication and time management so we can both be operating from the same place. Okay.
So let's go back to the chat, actually. I think it'd be useful to say, give folks an opportunity to answer the question here. If you can go back to the last slide, Erin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the question here, I would love to get some insight on from the group. What are the qualities of this response? What do you see happening? If you could write that in the Q&A, we'd love to see what you're thinking. What are you seeing here? I'm with Jalen. So we have a better way to communicate and approach the situation. Direct but constructive. Matter of fact, not emotionally charged. Factual information that connects back to how it felt was interpreted. Yes, thank you, thank you. Jalen is having to manage up in this situation 100%. Responsibility, even toned.
Someone's saying it's solutions oriented. So Amy, we're in the Q&A, actually not in the chat. You should be able to see what everybody's writing in the Q&A portion there. There's an initiative being taken for collaboration and sharing personal feelings and values. And there seems to be some emotional attachment to the newsletter. Yeah. There's a larger, I'm liking what Anne is saying here. Anne says, I'm seeing that by making these changes, Jalen is acquiescing to another conflict, why they were brought in to begin with, and their expertise or ability to reach a younger audience. So there's a larger conflict at the base of what just happened. I think that's really wise.
Absolutely. And I think that's worth getting into for Jalen and for Alex. So we're looking at how do these approaches, these models allow us to move forward into that possibly more a deeper conflict, but in a healthier way, right? What would it have been to start this conversation differently? So we have more to say about Jalen and about Jalen even using this model in the first place, but let's unpack what the model actually means for us.
All right.
So
you want to start? Go ahead.
Sure. So for the what happened, when we say what happened, it's important to start with the facts of what happened. Rather than saying something like, you disrespected me, we start with a restatement of the exact words that were said to the best of our ability. We're not stenographers. We're not court stenographers, right? This can also be shaped as a clarifying question, right? Asking questions about something during this time. So I'm clear. Before I tell you what happened, I'm also clear on some things if I need to get clear on some things that were said. So to someone's point, we're trying to mitigate interpretation here. We're trying to mitigate the presumption of intent here. That's not to say we don't feel all those things. Jalen certainly has assumptions about intent here. Jalen certainly has a very clear interpretation of what happened here because Jalen's a human being. But we're talking about a model for transforming conflict on the other side of this. Erin?
So the impact is essential to go over. So here is where we share really the impact of what happened, which allows the receiver to understand more deeply the emotional, mental, even physical impact of what was experienced, right? So we move from really identifying the objective sort of facts of what happened into how that was experienced and how that was felt.
Thank you. I'm also seeing that you can't see other comments on the Q&A, so we'll try to read them as many as possible. So I apologize for that, folks. Um, Possibility, yes, Aaron?
Yes.
Yes, possibility. So while not always necessary, the person sharing this may find agency in suggesting a way to move forward. They may also use this opportunity to clarify a boundary or an expectation for how they want to engage moving forward. So we're going to talk about onus in a moment. But this section, particularly as if there is a harm that's occurred, where Jalen is saying, I feel harmed, which we'll talk about the usefulness of this model in talking about harm. But this is an option for Jalen, for me, for all of us to move forward if it feels right, if it feels appropriate. It is not necessarily the responsibility at all of this person, of Jalen in this case, to offer a way forward, right? We talked about Jalen managing up, which sometimes needs to happen, but it will be up to Jalen to decide if this feels appropriate.
So we want to take Cardozy has touched on some of these things, but we do want to take a moment to talk about power and consent in a model like this. So this conflict model for sharing and receiving is useful for everyone. We do believe that. It is also the model that we use at True North. We've had to use it recently. So we stand by what it feels like actually to move through this model. It can feel really meaningful, right? However, identity and power matter. So what we want to say is that a consent-forward conflict practice means that the onus of resolving the conflict isn't on the person who holds less organizational or structural power. No one is required to take this on in this way. We do want to think about what it looks like to move through it in a conflict and what becomes possible on the other side. So the model, based on the values of restorative approaches to conflict, can hold restoration of harm caused by something like microaggressions, for example. However, in such a case, the receiver of the harm should ultimately decide if restoration is right for them, if it's something that they want. That isn't always the case, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot that goes into deciding whether or not someone wants to move through a restorative chat or a restorative approach to conflict. Kurt, is there anything you want to add here?
No, I think that, again, we want to offer this as for you all as, just professionals in the spaces that you operate in, as a model for taking this on. Should you be the Jalen in the situation? But I also want to acknowledge that the next model for how to receive feedback is not dependent upon Jalen sharing. So as a manager, as a leader, Alex has the agency and onus, we say, to work through that conflict in a transformative way, even if Jalen says nothing after that conversation, right? So this is, again, an offering for you, but not the onus per se of Jalen. But I think for me, having been Jalen sometimes, it has done wonders in terms of me kind of moving through conflict, because I have my value systems and my manager might not share, but doing this way can bring people into your values, which I think is a great way forward. I hope that maybe you can see the questions in the chat now. I think I toggled the toggle and it should be happening. Hopefully you can.
Yeah. Okay,
All right.
great. So moving through conflict on the receiving end, what we're going to see now is the model that moves us through gratitude, acknowledgement, apology, clarification, and commitment. So we're going to see that in action right now.
Jalen, I understand how frustrating this all was for you and how difficult it can be to share those frustrations. What I'm hearing is that my waiting until the day before to share concerns was unreasonable and disrespectful of your time. Thank you for saying all that. It's easy to forget how challenging it can be to get acclimated to a new job, and I made that even harder by not getting you what you needed from me in a timely manner and communicating it in a way that showed I valued your expertise and time. As you can probably tell, I can get torn between my responsibility to supporting my team and my responsibility to those individuals who, for better or worse, help fund our work. So, yeah. Let's make some time to sit down and have that conversation about values and agreements. In the meantime, I want to commit to not holding you responsible for my failure to get you feedback in time. I couldn't see it in the moment, but the newsletter could have been delayed a day or two. So go for it.
I was going to say, just inviting people back to the Q&A, qualities of this response, what you see happening.
The chat is still disabled, but hopefully you can see the questions in the Q&A. That's my hope. For those who are saying the chat is disabled, it is still disabled. So I'm seeing here, if I'm Jalen, I feel heard. The commitment should have been given Jay time off. Love that. The receiver should feel very well heard. Oh, great. We can see the questions now in the Q&A. Wonderful. Thank you. Acknowledgement of the harm done. This feels like a safe person to share openly with. So someone said what should have happened was that Alex gave Jalen time off. So that's one of those things where we want to self-diagnostic. Do I think something should have happened, right? And there's still room, I think, to the whole point is this is the beginning. This is a seed planted to have further conversation. This isn't the end of the conversation for them, right? Especially because they're going to have a more formal conversation. But it is difficult sometimes to engage in this way when I am, as a receiver, think that you should have said something that you didn't say, right? When the reality is there is no script. I can should all day long, but my desire for a thing that never happened ultimately doesn't get me any further in that conflict. So things that I'm always thinking about as well. Let's unpack this.
Absolutely. So we're going to start here with gratitude. Opening with gratitude really does set us up to receive what we're hearing as a gift. I mean, that's the best way to put it, right? It's something precious. It's something to be taken care of. And it prevents us from becoming defensive. It's really a cognitive tool to keep you sort of in the front part of your brain when you're hearing some feedback that might be difficult to hear. You also, once you've, done that, and of course, we saw that Alex did this in the other order, but it's still really important to reflect back what you heard the other person say, because that validates their point of view and ensures you're starting the conversation on the same page. There's nothing worse than starting a conversation on a place where if we've started with interpretation, all then we're doing is denying, right? And saying that's not what happened. That's not what happened, which can very quickly turn into gaslighting because we know that the nature of conflict is emotional.
I'd also add here, if we begin to paraphrase what we heard, it puts the receiver kind of like, that's not what I said. Right now we're in a back and forth. We want to, as clearly as possible, really share, this is what you just said to me. I want to let you know that I heard it. For apology acknowledgement, apologizing is acknowledging your actions had an impact on someone you are in relationship with in this situation. Rather than taking blame, it's taking responsibility as a participant in the conflict. So the apology piece is hard. Well, at least it can be hard for me and for many people I know who feel as though, if your orientation is often, I shouldn't have to apologize, or I was actually right. That's obviously not useful in productive conflict. There's always something. The reality is that there was an impact, and that impact is, to Aaron's point, not being gaslit. It happened, and we can be sorry about that, and we can acknowledge that happened.
Yeah. One note about apologies. We have a friend, Kathleen Antoine Abiela, often uses the term off-ramp. Apologizing has a lot of potential off-ramps that we want to just make visible. I would be very careful about an apology that looks like, I'm sorry you felt that way. You don't have to be sorry for anyone else's emotional experience or their feelings, right? You want to be sorry for what you did. You want to be sorry for the impact of your actions. I would notice if you find yourself avoiding, I'm sorry, or I apologize. Whatever the other like words you might be using, I have someone who often says apologies for that. There's a distancing, right? Apologies that had impact. That sounds like a general sort of like apologies from whom? From the cosmos, I guess. It's not actually taking responsibility. There's nothing wrong with and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did that. And I'm sorry it happened this way. Right? Stick with the basics. Any kind of word gymnastics immediately demonstrates to the person that you're trying to sort of evade any kind of accountability here. So
Thank you.
yeah.
So the clarification part of here that we did include is, I would offer a line that didn't exist in the previous model, which is, would you mind if I offer you some context of what I was going through that day? Right. So we're saying that this is clarification is an opportunity, if consented to share our intentions or add context in a way that supports the other person and or the relationship rather than defending ourselves. So clarification is actually code for defending yourself. Then it will break down this model. It'll break down the model, which is why we ask consent, especially if we're talking about a harm that has happened, because it can take us away from impact, right? If we lean too heavily into it, but it can be useful. We've done enough coaching, enough mediations to understand that in conflict, when someone hears more about what was going on, it gives way to something new, be it grace, be it just useful information that they can move forward with. So again, we want to look at this as a possible part of the model, but not necessarily one that has to be here, and very much is dependent on kind of who and what and is consent forward.
Absolutely. It also comes third, right? It's not first.
Right. And
so
we live here, right? Most conflict that breaks down lives in clarification.
absolutely. Cardozi and I say that most conflicts that we witness when we're being asked to consult or to facilitate or hold restorative chats, what's been happening in the process of the conflict has been an exchange of what happened and clarification. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, with no movement. And that actually erodes the relationship, it erodes trust, and then we just have we were looking for a way to talk about the bad vibes, right, between people, tensions, ultimately. So with commitment, words carry very little weight without action. This is also a value from restorative justice. If harms create needs, needs create obligations, and commitments, and engagement, actually living into those commitments, is essential for it to actually be restorative. Other than that, we wouldn't even consider it restorative as an approach. So this is an opportunity to share what you would like to do, change, or create in a way that mitigates the possibility of future conflict or future harm. I also say this is a nice opportunity to ask the other person to hold you accountable to that. Hey, if this happens again, I'd really love to, I'm going to work to not have this happen again. I also really want to invite continued feedback so that I can support you in this role, right? So invite continued feedback, leave that door open for the continued conversation.
I want to acknowledge there's a question from Robin in the chat, or in the Q&A, and I want to talk about it in a moment when we get to the Q&A question. The question is about what if you feel as though it isn't a good enough apology? How do you move forward with that lingering feeling? I think that's a really useful question. I want to come back to it. Thanks, Robin.
Absolutely. Thanks, Robin.
All right, so just a few important considerations, and this is where we're kind of wrapping up the share part of the webinar. But some things that come up for us when we go through the model and we want to just kind of get in front of. People don't talk like this. Well, people can and do speak like this, but it does take practice and should feel uncomfortable at first. So Aaron mentioned that we use this at True North EDI. We use it frequently to unpack things that have happened, be it around harm, be it around tension, be it around conflict, whatever the thing is. We operate through this model. Now, because it is more habitual for us, more second nature, we can play with it. It isn't necessarily as strict as this, but that's the whole point of a model, is that something that is not second nature, you are practicing how to use it. And then the more second nature it becomes, the more it can be adapted and responsive to the needs of the individuals and what you know about these people through relationship.
Absolutely. There's no one size fits all model for conflict. So what we're sharing is a way, it's not the way, and it's not the only way. We also, as Cardozi was saying, we just want to encourage you to speak in a way that honors who you are, right? We also, it doesn't need to sound like this. That's why, we have it in these kind of pillars, right? Gratitude, apology, commitment, right? We want to make sure that we're hitting those marks, but that it should come from you and it should come from your heart.
Thank you. Most conflict resolution requires something to be surrendered, right? So in some ways, going back to what Robin asked about, I wanted a better apology. That actually might have to be surrendered to move forward. Maybe not. It depends, right? It depends on the context. Jalen saying, I do want to be on the same page. There was a little bit of something being surrendered there. I want to hear about the voice of the company, the voice of the organization. This is not always the case, particularly around issues of microaggressions or harm. That we're not suggesting that a person who's been kind of transgressed or microaggressed has to surrender something. But in conflict, kind of more generally, I don't get to move forward with the other person showing up in the exact way I wanted and needed them to, because that person is not a puppet. And that person is not a character in my story that has been given a script. This is through years of like therapy and marriage and relationships with Aaron and professionally, right? You are not a character in my story, and you do not get a script, right? So I may have to surrender that, but I can use the model. We have the possibility and we have commitments. We can say, hey, moving forward, there is something I want to work to create together. And it relates to what happened. And we can then bring up the kind of, not that it wasn't a good enough apology, but that there was a need present that was not met. And we'd love to make that visible for the future. Here's a need that wasn't met that I want you to know about so that hopefully it can be met in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. I'm noticing something that Oshan, great to see you, Oshan, said in the chat, which I think is really powerful and true and matters for this next bullet. Oshan is saying it really requires a lot of trust and vulnerability from both parties. So what we want to say here is that all conflict is not created equal, and people get to choose how they step into it based on those levels of trust and accountability. If you have multiple experiences that tell you that your emotional reality is not important to the person that you're in conflict with, there have been multiple occasions of an attempt, right, to talk, and it just didn't work, right? You are not, again, owed that vulnerability in that relationship, and we want to move in a very consent-forward way. It's important. I would offer that all conflict is not created equal, and we trust you to know when to use a model like this to move forward. And sometimes, as Cardozi said, it's worth it to try, right? Curtis, any more you want to say about that? All conflict is not created equal.
No, that's great.
Great.
Thanks. So next, one way to introduce more empathy and ease to conflict is to be willing to start with identifying and acknowledging your part in the conflict, especially if you're a leader. So, we've been saying similar things, but to Oshan's comment here, the vulnerability is fertile ground for productive forward movement. To empathize, to share that you didn't do this. I was part of this as well, right? To the extent that anyone is, we're all part of conflict. Conflict requires two people. So I think this is really just offering what is the fertile ground on which a more meaningful relationship can grow, which I think is empathy is a big one for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, this model offers us a possible pathway to build trust among colleagues in day-to-day communication. This is an opportunity, I would say, not only to build trust, but also to rebuild it. There's quite a bit of wisdom about how when trust has been eroded for any variety of reasons, typically trust is eroded because a commitment was made and not followed through on, right? Or there's an embedded or understood commitment or agreement between people, and that is not honored, it's not followed through on, right? So this erodes trust, especially in relationships in a professional environment. If that's happened and you're willing to look at what Cardozi was just talking about and say, okay, what's my part in the erosion of trust here? And how might this model allow us to start to rebuild? It can actually be quite powerful. We also know that we've got it. It creates a sense of safety on a team. I know, just speaking personally at True North, I'm never worried that the floor is going to kind of be pulled out from under us, or the rug is going to be pulled out from under us in terms of our relationships as a team, because we have this. I know it's there. The container is there if we need to step into the container and kind of pour the conflict into it. It gives me a sense of safety and sustainability. And that's something that we want people to have. It really allows for belonging to thrive.
Aaron, I think that speaks a little bit to Elizabeth's comment here about how the conflict is between these two people, but there is kind of a workplace culture that needs to be addressed, right? And so when we talk about True North, it isn't just my relationship to conflict. There is a culture that we've had to cultivate over the years. And that is difficult. That is difficult when you are operating in a vacuum with an individual, when the culture around the culture around you is different as it relates to conflict, or is a little bit more toxic or unproductive. So those are real obstacles. The model, I will say, is still useful for between individuals. I think there's a way to adapt it for organizations. Obviously, as managers and leaders, again, who you are is pervasive and how you are is pervasive, but it's a really useful model to address and move through interpersonal conflict.
Yeah, I'm noticing some of the conversation that's happening in the chat as well, which I think we can certainly get to. We at True North always want to think about org culture as changeable, right? As malleable. This is a place to start. We are working with some organizations who are trying to essentially kind of turn the tanker on the way that the culture around conflict has been handled in the past, and there's a lot that contributes to it. But it is possible, and we have seen it happen. It will feel uncomfortable though, and there's, that's how we know it's working.
And I think to your point, Aaron, we believe culture is malleable, but this model also is reliant on a belief in malleability and elasticity and changeability, right? We have to believe that things can change. If you don't truly believe that, that's a kind of a different case. It's a different situation. I think it's a different conversation. But if you begin with a belief that things can change, things can be better, or that moving through conflict in this way can lead to something better, then that's where we begin. All right.
Just to wrap us up here, many folks I'm sure are familiar with Mia Mingus, disability justice advocate, and really one of our, I think, most important thinkers on accountability. She offers us that every day is another chance to practice living out the values that matter most to us, to be our best selves, and to be the legacy we want to leave. So I do want to invite everyone, as we move into Q&A, to think about who you want to be in conflict, and let that be aspirational. Notice if it comes up in you that you think you've got it figured out, right? Or there are some relationships not worth mending, or defensiveness, right? Acknowledging that know thyself piece is really important, but having a set of conflict values that are unique to you, that are aligned with who you want to be in the world, especially as it relates to diversity, equity, interdependence, belonging, is powerful. I have mine, written on my desk. I want to be reminded of who I want to be, so that I can even hold myself accountable. Right.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna come out of the slideshow now and make our faces bigger and open up to some Q&A. So thank you for those of you who have already asked questions, much appreciated. We'll look at some of those, and if you have questions coming up for you that we can help you with, help you think through, they might be answers, they might be offerings, they might be ramblings. We'll see how it goes. We'll share it. There's a question here about have organizations invested in a facilitator to help with these difficult conversations. I'm not sure if you mean the conversation between Alex and Jalen, which looks like mediation, which yes, that we've been hired to mediate to kind of help restore relationships when things may feel too charged, but we use this model. And I think also we've been hired to begin orgs down the path of generally introducing a new conflict framework across the organization, right? This really works well when I already know this is how we all agreed to step in. In situations when this is appropriate, we've all agreed that this is our entry point. So I'm not taken aback by if there's like a roboticness to the speaking. I'm not taken aback if there is an imperfectness or a clumsiness to it. Which I think we've pointed out, like if we can get things at the organizational level, that's the ideal.
Absolutely.
It's
I
also
think,
about doing this with leaders and managers because of the leverage point here.
yes. That's a similar question to Oshan's question, in terms of making sense to have another person or mediator be present when the interaction happens. Again, we have been present to help facilitate restorative conversations. And there's another discussion about the difference between mediation and facilitating a restorative, kind of repairing the harm conversation for folks, and making that possible. Again, that has happened. When Cardosi and I were designing this, though, and this is worth saying, we noticed that with a lot of our clients in our own relationships, when we were kind of digging up our own personal case studies, the need to bring in an outside facilitator means that things have gone on for a really long time. And actually, I think that likely you're having moments of tension, and even conflict, potentially on a day-to-day basis, that you choose to either engage or not engage. But a facilitator is required when it's gone on for a certain amount of time, or there's a certain level of harm, right, that needs to be addressed with a third party. We'd love to bring your attention to where there might be, sometimes in restorative justice, we call it the knots in the rope. It's just like, there's a tension, or there's a relationship that just has friction to it. We would encourage you to start, without having to invite anybody else in, see what this model can offer at those stages of the tension, at those stages of the conflict before it gets out of hand.
There are a few questions about will we be sharing the webinar. After the webinar, anyone who's registered, which is all of you, will be getting, I think tomorrow morning, we'll be getting a video recording of the webinar and a survey at the end of this webinar and tomorrow morning. Feel free to ask questions. That is why we're here. Can conflict resolution be used to address work performance issues? Interesting. I think the answer is yes. Certainly the spirit of this model is useful to address situations that may feel tense, situations that we feel like we need some kind of structural support to share with. Trying to think of when I've done this.
I would rely on a model like this for performance issues when experience has shown you that either there are not kind of normal, regular, what I would even call like easeful or casual feedback communication pathways, right? So feedback should be ongoing, right? We're having conversations. What kind of supports do you need, right? If those haven't been in place and the performance issue feedback is going to, there's been experiences that show you that there's a lot of defensiveness, or that it can be kind of quickly be about something else. This is a good model for that. But again, I would look at what your communication pathways are for feedback ongoing. That'll give you more information.
Yeah, we don't want it to be kind of an intervention in that way. We want it to be an ongoing practice. I do think that sharing difficult feedback, if I'm thinking about the what happened, an impact, and then a possibility, I think that's useful, right? Because either way, what we're asking the sharer to do is to remove interpretation, to remove kind of accusation, to remove. So if it's a matter of true performance, right, versus a transgression or something like that, if it's just a performance issue as a manager that you feel, I do think having a model that offers you um not, I don't want to say distance, but kind of just sticks to the facts of something that happened and the real life impact. If you missed a deadline, that impacts people. And those people have to work late. Those people have to pick up slack. Those people, that's a real thing. And so then what's the possibility? And I think the possibility piece here is a thing that we don't inherit as leaders, to take something difficult and say, okay, now let's create something wonderful from that. That's a thing that I think can be usefully gained from this model.
Absolutely. One thing I'd add to that too is one of our values around this conflict model is the value of my part. What's my part? Right? Even if you don't think you did anything
Yeah.
wrong, you're still a participant. So as a leader, if you want to be giving difficult feedback and you'd like to rely on some of these pillars for that feedback, I would not ignore what my part has been. Right? What's been my part in not offering you the supports that you've needed? What's been missing in terms of meeting this goal or meeting this expectation? And how can I support you in getting there? And then being willing to say, you know what, I need to acknowledge and apologize for the fact that I actually didn't give you the support you needed. That's what I'm hearing. So what I'd like to do is commit to you to do this, and moving forward, we're going to do this. Right? So, and that might even be if, I mean, I've acknowledged my part when the other person's part was way bigger. It takes a long time, but I know it's a means to an end that feels powerful and worth it for me. It just feels valuable. But I think it's a great question.
There's a question here about how we maintain the ethos of these practices when the situation is more egregious and the harm is more egregious. I would say the model has boundaries. And so we try to kind of name that. The folks involved, particularly if in an instance of microaggressions, if I've been microaggressed, I have to first say, do I even want restoration here? Is that what I'm looking for? And then I need to consent to that process. This is useful, I think, for a lot of conflict. And with conflict, certainly in the world that we live in, microaggression can slip right in there in a conflict because of who we are and how we've all been socialized. That doesn't mean it is that doesn't mean that nothing can be repaired, right? We're still using the model for repair, but there are things that happen that the model is not designed to support. I think that is ultimately on the person who is sharing the microaggression that happened, who received the harm.
I would look at the model, though, for designing commitments with other leaders, whether or not there's been an interpersonal restoration, we still need to restore whatever the structural harm is that's allowing that kind of behavior to happen in the organization. So the model can serve for a conversation like that. I'm looking at Robin's question. Thanks for that, Robin. Triangulation with higher up when two colleagues are not getting along. Never or it depends. I think it depends. First of all, I have a client right now. She is a VP at an ed tech company who has two folks on her team that do not get along. They almost, it's getting to the place of not being able to be in the same room. And she's aware of it. They're both talking to her about it. And what she is trying first is to set them both up to be able to have the conversation without her. Although she's willing to be there if it isn't going to work. But that means making sure that both of these people on her team have these kind of tools. Right. So I'm going to ask you to say it like this, to use this model to move through what happened, what the impact was, right, and what the possibility is. And she can work through that with these folks together so that they're both arriving at the conversation with some of that already thought about and designed. What do you think, Cardozy?
I'm with you. I'm looking at the next question, actually.
Oh, great.
I trust you completely. There's a question here. What can I do if my gratitude or apologizing at the beginning is not received as authentic? How do we move forward? That's interesting. I would say first, this likely because this intervention coming at a point where an established pattern exists, where there is already an expectation or framing around behavior or how we speak that I'm saying you're not being authentic. It's unlikely that would be coming out of a new kind of conflict situation. It's probably a compounded effect. That said, and that's okay. There's some things that I do if I feel as though people express that my apology or anything is inauthentic. I say, you know what, I think I can understand why you're saying that. Again, like now I'm putting back the model, right? I validate that. I hear that. I get why it might be hard to even believe me on this. And then the reality is I say I would ask you to accept me in my word. And more importantly, if you don't give me a chance to enact my commitment, I'm okay with you not believing my words right now, but then I have to counter that with showing up in my actions and my commitment.
Yeah, the apology, I think, is only as robust as the fulfilled commitment. So we want to consider that exactly what Cardozy said. I'd like the opportunity to do this differently. Now, I also, if I'm receiving an apology, I really have to be honest, and I have to go back to the value of know thyself. I have to be honest with myself about whether or not what I want from this person is for them to read my mind about the exact words I want to hear, the way that I want them to look like they feel really bad and sad. I have it all sort of designed in my mind, and if it doesn't match that, then I'm disappointed. We have the value of also, I've decided to step into this, and I know that person is different from me, and they might even apologize differently from me. What am I willing to say, okay, I'm also going to be looking for commitments, right? If an apology doesn't necessarily sound authentic, I also want to invite everybody for our own peace to the best of our abilities to get out of the other person's head. It's just, it's messy to kind of to assume that we know somebody is being sincere or not being sincere. Actions are the best way to tell that.
Thank you. Question here. Any advice on how this approach can be presented to executive level staff to use, thinking about how buy-in from those who have most agency and power to influence or culture? well, first, I think, one thing I would say is that depending on what you have to point to, there is an or cost and an impact to not having uh kind of a healthy or productive orientation to conflict. Again, most organizations don't have any declared approach to it or values around it. Many do. But there's a cost to that. And I think executive level folks, which many of you are, the first conversation is like, what's at risk here if we don't move forward in this way? And you can probably point to areas where where people or moments where things have not felt good, where people have quit, where there's been conflict, where people were I mean, there's so many opportunities to look at where did conflict go wrong here? And for me, as a leader, that is compelling information to say, you know what, there's no reason to approach this in a reactive way when we have tools at our disposal to create a proactive uh, and agreed upon approach. And I think that it's worth even saying, let's experiment for like 6 months, right? Make it time bound, so it can feel iterative, so it can feel not like play, but like something that isn't changing our DNA, but it's something that we can truly try on and see how it fits and tweak it as it goes, like we do any experiment. But I do think there's a cost to it, and so for any leader, we want to understand there is just a cost to not doing this. There's a very strong impact on mission, on productivity, on culture, and so on.
Absolutely. I would say too, in terms of the executive level, and I've said this to executive teams, and I don't mean it to be mean, but I mean it to just be true. You are seen. You are seen by everyone. You're seen for who you are and how you show up in these moments. If you are an executive level, you're a C-suite, like that, those kinds of the ways that you shape culture in terms of how you receive feedback, for example, in a meeting, or how you shut someone down, right? If you're having a town hall, whatever it is, it's visible to everyone who is working for you. It's visible to the culture, and people will start to shape how they behave around you and with you in response to those behaviors. So in working with this team at this ed tech company, for example, their CEO had someone working with them for a long time and kind of warned other people on the staff, hey, he doesn't respond well to this. He's very defensive around these topics. He's pretty open to talking about these things. And they basically got information in advance about who he was in moments of feedback or tension or conflict. So it's very visible to folks. And so we want to ask our executive teams, are we proud of who we are showing up right at? Right? What are our values? Because folks are interacting with us. And, oftentimes the further up the ladder you go within an organization, you're not necessarily getting a lot of feedback on that kind of stuff. With that power comes sort of the ability to operate, not always with a lot of accountability. So we want to make decisions about who we want to be in moments of conflict. And I think remembering that how we show up is very visible to everyone, and shapes the organization, to Cardozzi's point, is a good reminder, right? It's a little bit of a wake-up call.
Thank you. Any other questions? We are at about the 5-minute mark. I want to make sure we keep the space open for questions or thoughts coming up. Where are you based? The largest kind of bulk of our work is in New York City and surrounding areas. We have many clients throughout the country. My body is in New Orleans right now, where my house is. And a few of us live around the country. Most are based in New York, though. Yeah, and I think that, this is one of kind of the threads in the tapestry of our work. I'm sure many of you are aware of a lot that's going on with DEI right now, in terms of backlash and court cases and a lot of I would say, misinformation, when the reality is, in large part, this is what we're talking about, right? What does it mean to create spaces that feel healthy, that feel just, and that have actual practices and processes to support those things. And so these are our favorite conversations to have. So I'm glad you all joined today. Again, you will receive a survey when I press end. If you don't have time to do that, which we really appreciate if you do, you'll get it tomorrow as well via email. And then I'll just do a little plug. We are a small but mighty little Black-owned business. So any reviews, testimonials are very useful. Google reviews go a really long way right now. They're very, very important to us. And anything you'd like to offer or add via testimonial, via the survey, much appreciated. And if you'd like to work with us or like to just talk to us, get some just get a conversation going, we're very happy to speak with you and see what we can create together. Erin?
Absolutely. Well, just thank you so much. This is really one of my favorite things to talk about. There was a comment earlier, just that when someone handles conflict really well, it's so impressive. It's moving, I would almost say. So we can be that. We can all be that. It's just a matter of kind of taking a leap of faith. So thank you all for doing that with us today.
Yes, thank you very much. We will see you soon, I hope. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.